Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Bob Findor. I'm one of the school counselors at Unionville High School. We'll kick things off here in a couple minutes. I'm just going to allow some more of the attendees to come into the webinar, but I'd just like to say welcome, and we're excited you're here tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. Hello to those of you that just joined us here. We'll be starting here in a few minutes. I'm Bob Findor. I'm one of the school counselors at Unionville High School. We'll get this webinar started here for the college planning night here. We'll get that started in about a minute or two here. We have some more people pouring in. We really appreciate everyone coming tonight and your participation. Welcome to those of you that just joined us here. We're going to get started in another minute for the Unionville High School College planning night here. Thank you very much for coming. I'll kind of kick things off here in a minute or two with introductions and kind of give an overview of exactly what a webinar is, just in case you've never been a part of one. And I'll kind of give everyone an overview, just about a minute, because we still have some more. We have some more participants jumping in to the webinar. All right, so I think we're going to get things started here. So I'll start off with some introductions, and what I'll do is I will move into kind of giving a brief overview of exactly what a webinar is, just in case anybody has not been a part of one before. We are recording this webinar. However, I want to be very clear about this. Those of you in the audience, we can't see you, we can't hear you. I'll discuss here in a minute that you'll be able to communicate through the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions for the college admission reps here tonight. So I'd like to start off by saying thank you, everybody, for participating here tonight. These webinars, we started doing them, I believe, last year. We were able to hold 3 of them last year. They were very, very popular. We are extremely fortunate to have such great relationships with individuals from different colleges and universities to get their perspectives. I would really like to thank Jeremy Branch is here tonight from Penn State as a representative. He'll be talking tonight about the components of the college application process here in a little bit. And I would also really love to thank Sean Abbott's also here from Temple University. Sean will be speaking after Jeremy and discussing some of the highly selective process. Sean's been to a few different college universities. He'll talk a little bit about that after Jeremy. And then we'll open things up for both of them at the end to really discuss making the most of a college visit and what that looks like, because both of them have a lot of experience and a lot of background in that. Just so you know, before I really get things started here, I just want to give a brief overview of the webinar in itself. All of you as attendees, we cannot see you, we cannot hear you. We as panelists, obviously you can see us and hear us. You might notice at certain points, maybe Sean or Jeremy may be on mute, or even maybe their screens might disappear for a minute or two if they have to step away from the computer as the other one may be presenting. But again, as far as tonight goes for the webinar, you will be able to communicate with us through the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to ask as many questions as possible, even if they are very specific questions to Unionville High School. I'm very fortunate to have Mrs. Colleen Miller kind of behind the scenes here tonight, filtering out some of the questions that may come in. And if it's very specific even to our high school, she'll be able to help us and assist us with the Q&A as we go through the night. I would also like to point out that we will be having in the chat down at the bottom, we'll also be having a link that will be provided to the families out there in our webinar here. That link will take you to a feedback form, which we truly appreciate any feedback to improve these webinars as we do them from year to year. So again, I would like to thank Colleen, Sean, Jeremy here tonight. We have some of our high school counselors actually that are going to also be kind of coming in throughout the night to filter in and help out with some of the questions. I would really like to thank Justin Webb. He's our tech guru over at Unionville High School. Those of you in the community may have seen some emails from him or some communications from Justin. He does a phenomenal job and assists us with this each year and just does an excellent job. As far as the format, in a minute here, I'll be turning things over to Jeremy. And what I'll do is Jeremy will kind of present, talk a little bit about the application process and some of what he's seen. And then I'll keep an eye on some of the questions as they come in. And again, if they are not answered already through Colleen, we'll actually open them up to everybody to be able to see and for Jeremy to be able to potentially answer after he presents here. So again, I'm Bob Findora, school counselor at Unionville High School. For those of you that came in a couple minutes late here, we'll get this thing started. So Jeremy, I really appreciate you being here tonight. It's nice to see you again, as always. And thanks so much for what you do for the Unionville community. You're a great resource for us. Thanks again.
No problem, Bob. It's good to be here and good to catch up with you and Colleen a little bit. It's been a while. I miss everybody, but it was nice to step foot in the building this fall, you know, and do my actual visit back at Unionville. It had almost been 2 years since I had been on campus, which is 2 years too long when you love a community like I love Unionville. As he mentioned, my name is Jeremy Branch. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Admission at Penn State University. I have actually been a longtime member of the Unionville Planning out there and just finished up my term on the Portrait of a Graduate Committee for Unionville Chad's Fort, which was incredibly rewarding. So that was amazing. And I know it just got approved by the board. So congratulations, good stuff coming there. But it's nice to be with you a little bit to talk about something that's been on the minds of a lot of families, especially right now. These juniors, you're getting ready to be rising seniors in a little bit. A lot of folks who have been contacting me have been asking, Jeremy, what does college admission look like right now? How have things changed and been impacted by COVID-19, right? And it's hard to believe we're still talking about this going into year 3, but we are. And there's a couple of pieces of advice I have for you, some pieces of the application that I want you to realize matter more than others. And we'll talk about a little bit about the student's role versus the parent's role and things like that as we go forward. But one of the things I want you to understand and appreciate a little bit about your college search journey right now is that we're kind of all in this thing together, and that is a real big positive. Well, why do I say that? Well, you have to remember that, like, let's say prior to COVID, when something happened to a certain community, right? Well, whether it was a tragedy in a certain community or something that was very specific to a region, it was hard to empathize with that, right? Like you could sympathize with, oh my gosh, this hurricane just came through Florida. So applicants to our university that are coming from Florida, we've got to give them some time, right? But up here in Pennsylvania, we weren't necessarily impacted by that same storm, right? So you're sympathizing with them, but we weren't in that same situation. So, you know, it was hard to go kind of further than that, right? Yep. But when it comes to COVID and its impact, we've been in the same storm. Whether you're an admissions counselor or school counselor, whether you're a high school student or parent of a high school student, we've all been impacted from it, right? So admissions counselors not only sympathize with what you students have been enduring, we empathize with it as well because we've been going through the very same thing. But one of the nuances to this, though, is that although we've been in the same storm, we've been in different boats within that same storm. For example, some students I've spoken with and families that I've met with that are seniors right now, so they're already receiving their decisions. Some of those students have lived their best lives in COVID, right? They may be more introverts, right? Or students are a little bit more visual learners. And so learning through Zoom wasn't necessarily impacting them the way it was a hands-on learner, right? But you have some students who have never been more anxious. Being thrust back into the classroom, having been remote or virtual for a year and a half of their schooling, if not more, has been arduous for them. It has not been a great experience. Their grades may be reflecting that, right? Some families have never had more money in their bank accounts. while other families have never been more financially insecure. And all of this impacts your college application journey, doesn't it? Right? Because affordability, where your dream school was, but maybe where your grades are, these things might not be lining up quite like you were expecting at one time when you entered the Unionville building as a freshman, right? So never has it been more important for students, in my opinion, to find the personal fit through their college search. How does that look for you? What does fit include? What does that term even mean? Well, you'll hear a lot of times school counselors refer to your college search as you're trying to find the right fit. You'll hear college admissions counselors use that terminology as well, because we're trying to, just like you go to American Eagle or wherever you shop and you look for that pair of jeans that fits just right, you're kind of looking for that same type of thing with your college campus and the college community that you're going to be joining. No, when I talk about fit, I talk about fit in three particular areas that I really want you to key in on. The first is academic fit.
Mhm.
The second is social fit. And the third is financial fit. So what is academic fit? Well, this is something that's going to differ student from student, right? Now, size is part of academic fit. You know, some of us, we thrive in smaller environments, which is kind of what you've been in since kindergarten. You might not realize that at this point in time, but, you know, having class sizes of 20 to 30 students, that's small compared
Mhm.
to what you're going to see at a lot of colleges and universities.
Sure.
Do you thrive in that type of environment? Are you the type of student that needs to be able to raise their hand and ask questions, right, as a key part of your learning process? Well, that factors into academic fit, right? You're looking for a smaller, medium-sized university typically if class size is something that really can impact you in your learning style. Are you the type of student who has learning differences? You know, that factors into academic fit. An interesting thing that surprises some students who have learning differences is when they find out that the accommodations available at the colleges and universities that are on their list don't necessarily line up with the accommodations you've been receiving at Unionville. We're
Sure.
not held to the same state and federal mandates
Sure.
that your school district is, right? So if I have a learning difference, that better be part of the academic fit. What about, are you the type of student who's a competitive student? Right? Like if your school ranked, you know where you rank in that building. And thank God Unionville got rid of that a number of years ago. We've seen positive benefits
Sure.
in the Unionville community because of that. But,
Absolutely.
you know, some students thrive off of that, like being shoulder to shoulder with other students who are striving to be number one in the class. Are you
Yep.
that type of kid? Or are you the type of student who loves a nurturing environment where it's kind of like you're part of a community? We're all going through this thing together. That factors into academic fit. Usually when it comes to this subject, I like to do a little exercise. If Harvard came to you tomorrow, let's say they approached every junior family at Unionville and they said, hey, we love your community so much that we're going to admit every single one of you in the junior class to Harvard next year. Congratulations. You don't even have to apply. You've got an offer of admission. Do you go? Now you might be looking at me like, Bob, is this who you
Yep.
invited to come and speak to us tonight? This idiot. If I get admitted to Harvard, I'm going. But like,
Sure.
think about this. If
Yep.
you are the student who thrives more in a nurturing environment, is that going to be the place for you?
Mm.
The type of place where every student is competitive in their classroom space, right? Where students in the business schools are vying to be in that top 10% for the top internships in Wall Street. That, although you're a good student and it may be considered perhaps the best university in the world, does it academically fit,
Mm.
right? Or maybe you're one of those students, you're a solid B kid, right? And there's nothing wrong with being an average B student. Let's not get it twisted. There is nothing wrong with that. But is Harvard the right place for you, where everybody else in the class with you is pretty much the valedictorian from their respective high school? That factors in the academic fit. These are the things we have to talk about, right? What about social fit? Well, this is things like, you know, the clubs and organizations that you're a
Mhm.
part of. Are they represented on that campus? Like if I'm an orchestra kid and I run into these students all the time, like you have been involved in every ensemble that's available at your high school, right? You are there, you love doing it, but you're not going to be a music major. Are there still ways for you to be a part of ensembles? See, this is where social fit comes in. Or maybe I'm a student of difference. Is the type of person I am or community that I'm a part of, are they represented on campus?
Mhm.
And this is not just a cultural thing. This is whether you're a part of the LGBTQIA plus community, right? Do I see people like me represented on that campus? Do the clubs and organizations I love and the things I love to be involved in, are they represented there? That's something that you've got to ask. That's part of social fit. This is also where size can play a part too, right? Some of us, we want to be a part of that like large collegiate atmosphere, kind of like you see pictured behind me at Penn State University. You're saying, hey, man, I got to be one of 46,000 students in Beaver Stadium on a football Saturday. That's part of your social fit. There's nothing wrong with desiring that, right? But that's where that fits. Ask yourself those questions. And then this brings us to the third part of fit I want you to think about. This brings us to financial fit. It's kind of Freudian that I kept this to the last part because a lot of families will have this be the last thing they think about or talk about. It's got to be earlier in your college search journey. You've got to have the financial conversation early for a number of reasons. For one, when you look at graduation rates at a lot of colleges and universities, you're going to be surprised that some of the schools that may be on your list, their graduation rates may be not as high as you thought they were. And the interesting thing to that is that that's not always because a student didn't academically fit there. Sometimes the financial fit wasn't there because you have to think about college this way. It's like buying a brand new car every year for 4 straight years. Think about that. If that would be a challenge for you in year one, that means it's going to be a challenge for you all 4 years. If I can't financially afford an institution for 1 year, my son or daughter does not leave as a graduate until 4 or 5 years down the road. It's got to financially make sense over that long period. Your child's ability to persist at an institution is not just academic, but it could be financial. Have these conversations with your sons and daughters early, parents, because right now it's kind of like monopoly money to us. Right. Like I used to always just ask my dad for $20, not realizing he cried every time I put my palm out. Right. Because I'm just thinking, hey, he's like an ATM. It just comes every time I need it. It comes. Right.
Yeah.
But that's not the case. It's a finite resource. Help your sons and daughters understand what would that loan payment look like after 4 years after you graduate and you've got $60,000 in debt. What would my monthly payment look like, right? If I'm $100,000 in undergraduate debt, what does that look like? What could that impact? These are conversations you need to have, right? Because I oftentimes in June am having very painful conversations with students who paid an enrollment deposit somewhere, got super excited about going there, bought all the sweatshirts and all the gear just to find out when the payments are due that this is going to be a lot harder than they thought. Talk about financial fit as soon as possible as a family. Next, I would typically talk about visiting college campuses, but we're going to reserve that
Thank you.
for a little bit later as a group. But that's an important part of finding fit as well. And we'll explain
Absolutely.
exactly why that is in a few minutes after my dear friend Sean gives his talk about highly selective. But the other thing I wanted to bring out about your college application process is understanding how an admissions decision is rendered, right? Because there's so much rumor that goes on like, hey, I know that kid got in because of this. I know my classmate didn't get in because of this. And you got to understand, like, there's different tiers of things that we look at and they're weighed in different ways. There are primary factors, secondary factors, and a fancy way of saying third is tertiary factors, right? The foremost thing that people like me and Sean look at when we sit down with your college application are your grades, your curriculum, and the level of classes that you've taken, and your test scores, unless you choose not to send them, right? If we're a test optional school, then we don't use them. Now, here's one of the things that's interesting. You're going to notice I didn't say essays in the foremost things. I didn't say letters of recommendation. They go in secondary. But the primary things we look at are the things that give us the best indication of what kind of student you're going to be at Penn State and Temple, right? What you spent the most time doing in your classes is what we spend the most time evaluating, right? Now, that doesn't mean things like essays and recommendation letters and all those things don't matter. They do, but that's like the icing on the cake. It's not the cake, right? If I have a 2.5 GPA and I've been a part of all the clubs and organizations that Unionville offers, in admissions, we say that's great, but what happened with the GPA, right? So, and I'm sure Sean's going to talk a little bit more about that evaluation as we move forward. But when it comes to your college application journey, understanding what we're going to spend the most time with and how we read those things can sometimes shape my list, right? And help me figure out where could I fit in? Where could I find that academic fit that we're talking about, right? Test optional is something that's on the minds of a lot of people. It's written about in countless newspapers, the Wall Street Journal's printing all sorts of things about it. And your neighbors in your community, they have all sorts of opinions about it. A number of universities have guaranteed students that they're going to be doing it through at least 2023, right? And that's a great thing. So that means through your class, you're going to see a lot of our universities doing it. Now, universities like Temple, they're going to say to you, hey, man, we were ahead of the curve, right? We've been test optional for quite some time, and that's beautiful. But understand this, test optional does not equal automatic admission. See, a lot of students have come to me surprised at their Penn State admissions decisions. They're saying, Jeremy, wait, hold on. I thought I was a shoo-in for Penn State University Park. What in the world happened? It's like, yes, you were test optional, but guess what? When we don't have a piece of information like testing, we then dive deeper into what we do have, your curriculum, your grades. See, there were some students who were unbelievable English and history students, right? And they kill those areas when it comes to school. They're guaranteed A's, but their science grades, not so great. Did you know that brings your overall profile down? Because we're looking at comprehensively, what kind of student are you? So some students just thought, oh, we're going to skip over that. We're going to glance over that. But no, we take a deeper look at that because you are test optional, right? So as you try to evaluate whether or not even that's a great option for you, I want you to incorporate your school counselors, right? This is one of my favorite school counseling offices in the whole wide world, right? And if I was in the Unionville Chadds Ford School District, if any of these 6 counselors were my son's counselor, I'd be enthralled with that. They know their stuff. They have contacts at colleges and universities. You know, Sean and I didn't wind up here by mistake, right? We set aside this time. We said, hey, man, when Unionville calls, we're going to be there, right? But they know how to advocate for students. They know how to ask questions. And I get questions from them all the time. Hey, Jeremy, what's looking different this year with Penn State admission? Or what's some of the things that students are getting caught up on that you really want them to know, right? So communicate with them and they'll help you build, you know, your application in the best way possible as well. Now, the final thing I'll talk about before I hand the platform over to Sean is components of your college application process need to be handled by certain people at certain times, right? And this is where the student's role versus the parent's role really comes into play. Now, if I asked you a rhetorical question, because we're on the webinar, who's to drive the college search journey bus? Is it the student or the parent? What would you say? Now,
Yeah,
I
I
know
mean,
you're looking at me and you're saying, Jeremy, I it's my student, I know. Yeah, you may know that in an academic sense, but do you agree with it? That's a different thing with parents
yep.
entirely, right? Sometimes parents look at me and they say, Jeremy, look, I can't even trust my son or daughter to make their bed in the morning. So you're telling me you want me to entrust this incredibly important search journey to them? Yeah, but they need to lead it. They do, for a variety of reasons. For one, the student's the one who's going to college. And we always are doing research institutionally and nationally, trying to look at what leads to success in college, right? And there's no silver bullet. We're going to keep looking for it, but we haven't found it yet. But one of the things that does seem to correlate to student success is comfortability. Because when you're comfortable on campus, you wake up in a good mood. When you wake up in a good mood, more often than not, you go to class in that good mood. When you go to class in a good mood, you retain information better. When you retain information better, your grades increase. When your grades increase, your GPA increases, obviously, right? And as your GPA increases, you wind up with more internship and job opportunity. But where did we start? What was that foundation of success? It was comfortability.
Yep.
It was happiness on campus. This is why students have to drive the bus. They have to actually like where they're going. Does it have to be the perfect institution? No, that doesn't exist. I know a lot of you think it does. I know a lot of you are thinking, no, my number one choice, Jeremy, it's perfect. It's perfect. So you can't tell me otherwise. There's no such thing. There are over 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States alone. Many of them have been around since before, the 1850s, before the 1900s, and they're still around today, which tells you that a lot of them are really good at what they do. There's no such thing as one perfect university outside of Penn State. There's no such thing as one perfect university. So knowing that, wherever you wind up, you've got to like it. You've got to feel comfortable there. You've got to feel like this is a community you can be a part of for 4 years. The student is also the one that we're evaluating, right? So they're the ones that we want to work with and we want to talk with. So that makes sense there too. So they need to take the lead. We want to hear from them. So on the day-to-day stuff, students, I want you to take the lead. When it comes to, hey, I want to reach out to Sean at Temple. I got a question. Or, Jeremy, how does this work with Penn State? I want to hear from the students. I want to receive those emails from the students. One of the things that we have access to are these things at our universities. This might be a little too inside baseball, but they're called CRMs, customer relationship management tools. Did you know that we have on file every email you've ever sent us? How many times you've ever called us? When and if you actually opened that email we sent you about our high school visit, right? When I see those things coming from a student, by the time it's time to review an application, it makes an impact, man. Because when a student's like, Jeremy, I'm really interested, and you've seen that over those 2 years, I always did hear from the student, that makes an impact. I just had a mother email me yesterday, Jeremy, my daughter is so interested. Then why am I not hearing from her? Right? Day-to-day stuff, reaching out to colleges and universities, scheduling tours, scheduling meetings with their school counselor to talk about college. The student needs to do those things, right? One of the benefits it's going to have on the back end is that you're learning how to self-advocate. And that's a skill and a trait that's really going to benefit you as a student when you come to our colleges and universities. So give them that license to work on that now. Parents, you're my long-term thinkers, though. This is where my mom and dad were incredibly invaluable to me. Because when I would fall into the love with the little things on a college campus, right? Like one school I visited, I couldn't believe they had beach volleyball courts. And I was like, sign me up. Now, I didn't play volleyball, but I was just in love with that, right? My father was like, okay, well, what percentage of your students that graduate from this program have a job within 6 months? And he would take note of that. Or what percentage of your students receive scholarship as freshmen, right? Like the big picture things. Parents, that's your job. When we start falling in love with a school, you're the one asking questions about financial aid, right? And how that works. When we're over here trying to make sure that we've got our essays written, you're the one on the other end making sure, hey, are we adhering to all the deadlines, right? You're my big picture thinkers. Don't just have your students talking about jobs. Talk to them about careers. Help your sons and daughters understand what it is you do. So many of you would be surprised that your sons and daughters have no idea what you do for a living. They have no idea. My dad, he throws on a Patagonia vest and grabs his briefcase and goes to work every day, comes back at 6. Jeremy, I have no idea what happened in between, right? These are like actual conversations I've had with students. Talk to them about what you did, how you got there. Help them understand that their career path's not necessarily going to be linear, right? It'll take all sorts of twists and turns, but the big picture stuff, when it comes to their application process, it's huge for them, right? I hope some of this information was helpful for you. I'm going to stop there because I can talk about this for about 3 hours, and I'm going to stop at 23 minutes.
Jeremy,
but any questions?
Yeah, Jeremy, as always, it's, what a pleasure and thanks for your depth of knowledge. And we had a couple come in and Miss Miller was able to address a few of them. But Jeremy, I think one of the first ones here, Mrs. Miller was able to actually, one of the questions we had in the chat that Mrs. Miller was able to actually address in the chat. But I would like to actually hear from you. I get this a lot year in and year out. I mean, we send a lot of students to Penn State. It's a phenomenal institution. I get it all the time from parents, though. Is there a certain number of students that Penn State's going to admit from Unionville High School specifically? Is there a certain number? And I know Mrs. Miller addressed like there's not exactly a certain number, but yeah, if you don't mind touching on that and just letting our community hear it from you, I get that question a lot in the counseling center. Oh, I'm sorry, you're on mute there, Jeremy. Sorry about that.
No, that's my fault. There's no quota. We look at students on a case-by-case individual basis and look at them in the context of what's available to them in their high school and what they elected to take and those types of things. But we don't care if the entire junior class comes to Penn State, right? If you have what we're looking for, then you're going to get an offer of admission. We do not care. And that's going to be the vast majority of schools. The only time where you would find, and I'm sure Sean could provide some context for this as well after he speaks, but the smaller an institution or the more selective an institution, the more you worry about building a class. Right. And so you're not going to want 300 Strathaven students when you have room for 400. Right.
Mhm.
Like you're really trying to diversify your pool geographically, ethnically, gender wise, and all those types of things. But Penn State, we've got close to 90,000 students. Right. So we're like, hey, man, if everybody at Unionville is excited about the university and you qualify for admission, you're going to get an offer of admission, and then it's up to you to accept it.
Okay. Yeah, it's great. Thank you, Jeremy. We had a question there. I think you touched on it earlier as part of your presentation. You touch on visiting the campus and how that's a great indicator to start understanding the culture of a campus and a school. So I'll hold off on that question. We'll keep it in the chat there till we're able to talk about that towards the end with both you and Sean. But I guess, Jeremy, the last question I have for you here is, and this is something that we get a lot in the counseling center also, talking about the admissions and tracking how much is admissions from year to year, tracking students who are test optional compared to students that are sending in their SATs. And do you guys look at that at the admissions and kind of start wavering some of your decisions based off of that? Like what does that look like as far as how much the colleges and universities track that?
Yeah, so we, for schools like Penn State, who we're new to the test optional game, right? Like, there are some universities out there that have been doing this since the dawn of time. It's not new to them, but for us, it is pretty new, and we only have 1 year worth of data to really go off of right now. But last year, it was interesting. 60% of the students who applied to Penn State last year applied test optional. Mm-hmm. Of our incoming class at the university across our 20 campuses, about 50% of the students who are freshmen right now at Penn State were test optional. So what does that tell you? Well, number one, it tells you that there was long a need for schools to be test optional. Not everybody's a great test taker. You are a fabulous student. You are awesome. You're going to be a community builder and changer. But that one test on a Saturday morning for 4 hours doesn't do it for you, right? And so it showed that there was a real need there, but it also showed that there are other things that a student displays that shows they are qualified applicant. And there have been people for years that have been shouting this from the mountaintop, but it just wound up being that society caught up. And this was one of the silver linings of COVID. Society caught up and said, yeah, you know what, let's talk about this a little bit more. So it is not disparaging to a student. The only thing I will say, which is in harmony with what I mentioned earlier, it is not a get out of jail free card, for Monopoly terms. It is not it does not make it easier. We are going to look at the information that we do have in a fuller way, in a deeper way. And so you have to be prepared for that piece.
Okay. All right, great. Well, Jeremy, I have Sean. I'll have one more question here for Jeremy, and I'll kick things over to you, Sean. Jeremy, just last question. You talked about you touched on a lot of the do's, definitely, as far as the college application process goes. A couple of the do nots, right? But especially for some of our families that might have came in towards the end here, just what you've seen before COVID, now after COVID, or now during the pandemic here. What would you say, kind of, from a student standpoint, from a parent standpoint? I know you scratch the surface on this. Some of the bigger mistakes you see in the process. What are some of the bigger mistakes you see with all the applicants you see from year to year?
Giving into societal pressure, the bumper stickers. When it comes to your neighborhoods, every May where every senior in your neighborhood is going. because dad and mom on the SUV, the station wagon, whatever they're driving, the sedan, they've got that brand new magnet, right? That brand new bumper sticker. And listen, this is to be celebrated. This is an accomplishment. Graduating from high school is an accomplishment, right? Like, I mean, especially now that I'm a parent. Oh my God, if my son graduates from high school, I'm be number one dude in the area celebrating. Man, it's just a miracle. But is that what's driving how you build your list? And listen, I know the Unionville community, man. I love you guys, but you are hype when it comes to this college admission thing. And I
Yep.
know it's on the minds of students. I hear the
Yep.
conversations in the hallways. I hear the conversation before
Yep.
I start my Penn State presentations. This is something, hey man, where are you applying? Where are you going? Where'd you hear back from? And I know the moms are talking about it. I know dads are talking about it, right?
Yep.
And it's a real thing in Americans culture and world culture, but American culture, to really focus a lot on that, the brand names. You can't make your decision off of that. Every August, my phone blows up with parents and students. Hey, Jeremy, is my Penn State offer still a hold, or is it too late to apply? And they wound up going to a place and hating it,
Mhm.
because they didn't
Yep.
choose it for the right reasons, right?
Yep.
Or after a semester, it's October, they're already emailing me, hey, can I transfer into Penn State? Well, what
Yep.
happened?
Yep.
Right? You went to a lauded university, but it doesn't fit your academic style, your personality. It's too far away. All of these types of things. And had you just reduced that noise a little bit and thought about fit, you would have been all right. You would have been absolutely fine. That's a huge mistake that students in our communities make.
Yeah, no, Jeremy, thank you very much. I don't know if the participants are able to see here, Jeremy, but Mrs. Mary Beth Lyles here has moved on to Dean of Students now. I don't know if you're
Yep.
aware. She's
Yep.
moved out of our department, but you can see in the question and answer there, she's here joining us tonight, and she definitely appreciates the point you brought up about talking about that financial fit early on in the process. So the students and parents are on the same page. So I do appreciate that earlier. Jeremy, thanks again. If you don't mind hanging around for a little bit, we'll kick things
Yeah.
back over when we start talking about college visits here. I'm going to actually swing things over to Sean Abbott here from Temple University. Sean, we're going to discuss a little bit, if you have some points you can touch on, just about the highly selective college application process. I know you've been to a few different universities, kind of give your background a little bit. And then Sean, I have actually one or two questions that have been in the chat that I kind of want to save for you, discussions about early decision and even mid-year grades, things like that, and the test option a little bit, touching on that standpoint too. But Sean,
Sure.
thanks again for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. And if you don't mind sharing with our community here some of your information, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure, but why do you got me following this guy? Like, not left for me to say. I mean, you told me he was good, and I'm predisposed not to like Penn State, so I didn't even want to like him. But I don't want to follow this guy.
No,
That's
no
a lot
problem,
of
Sean.
good
Like,
stuff.
like I said, we will, trust me, some of the questions will start to pump in here. We'll have enough for you on your plate here in a couple minutes, I'm sure.
I mean, your family's just got a really avalanche of good information. I mean, that's really. I mean, all I can do is enforce some of the things that he shared with, and I do have to hand it to Jeremy because when you put two admission officers in a room like this, especially when we start getting into questions and answers, we can literally suck up the oxygen in the room talking about the admission process.
Yep.
And then finances and financial aid and affording college gets like crammed into the last 2 or 3 minutes. And, that has to be such a bigger part of what college admission officers talk about.
Yep.
And admittedly, we don't tend to do a great job about it because we kind of acquiesce to the anxiety that students and families have about just getting into college.
Sure.
That we just don't spend enough time talking about how to afford college. And, I would say before I came to Temple, I was the Dean of Admissions at NYU for nearly a decade. And probably the hardest part of my job was working with families during that month of April and May and June and July and August.
Yep.
Before students would enroll. And they were so hungry to gain admission that there really wasn't a plan to how to afford their education. And Jeremy, wisely pointed out that, you can go out and get the swag, you can pay your enrollment deposit, you can pay your housing deposit, you can go to Bed Bath & Beyond and start fitting your residence hall with the stuff that you think that you're going to need for college. But when that bill comes in July, you need to have a plan for how you're going to afford your education. And by May 1st, you should have a pretty good, accurate sense of what a university costs and what you're able to contribute before you make that kind of commitment. So, I really appreciate that Jeremy gave you that kind of sage advice at the very beginning, or at least in the middle of what
and Sean, I appreciate you bringing that up also. And to the families out there in webinar world here, I will say this is a reminder for everybody. I've been sending out the information about our future webinars. Sean, believe it or not, one of our webinars that's exactly one of the topics discussing financial aid. One of our future webinars that we're going to spend some time on. I know it's hard, like you mentioned, for me to get all this information out of both of you and kind of get all this info about the application process. It's hard to kind of squeeze that in on a night like this also. So I do appreciate you touching on that. And for families out there, we will be addressing that in one of our future webinars here within the next month or two. So thank you, Sean.
I don't think, either people like myself or Jeremy want to scare families about what college costs, because, obviously we represent two public universities here in the state of Pennsylvania. So if you look at our sticker price, it's going to be more attractive when you compare it against other private college universities. But in the end, depending on who you are and what academic credentials you have to bring to the table and what level of financial need you may have, you're likely going to find that some private college universities are going to be more affordable than Pitt or Penn State or Temple. You can't assume that just based on what you see as a sticker price that any one of your public or state supported institutions are going to be more affordable. So I don't want to scare anybody.
Great point.
It's just the most important part of where I think parents need to zero in on is getting a really good handle on what each college university requires to be considered for financial assistance. So, I'm not 100% sure what Penn State requires for financial aid eligibility, but at a place like Temple, we require the FAFSA. And if, quite honestly, you're even a day late with submitting your FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, by our deadline, which is February 1st, you're out of the running for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars that we have for financial aid for students every year. If you're looking at private universities, places like NYU and a lot of the other really popular private institutions in America, they're typically going to require something called the CSS financial aid profile, which is sort of like the online version of the common application for financial aid. And if you miss like NYU's deadline for financial aid, you're going to take yourself out of the running for millions of dollars of possible financial aid that you could be tapping into. So, and I don't mean that individually, I just mean collectively, the bigger pot of cash. So, I guess, a few things that I would share, and they're really kind of enforcing some of the things that Jeremy shared, but probably the most consistent piece of advice that I could give you, or the most consistent observation that I have about the college admission process across the 5 universities that I've represented, which are Temple, Columbia, Stanford, Boston University, and New York University. That's where I've spent the last 25 years of my life. Great. Across all 5 of those institutions, from like the most entry-level position that I had to the position that I have at Temple now, the most consistent observation that I have about college admissions is what Jeremy shared with you. Your academic record is unequivocally going to be the most important part of this process. Doesn't matter if the college university is a 3% admit rate like Stanford, or a place like Temple, which has the capacity to admit the majority of students who apply. We zero in on your academic record first and foremost. And we pay attention to not just your GPA, which, quite honestly, is meaningless to a lot of college university admission officers unless we know exactly where you go to high school, but we zero in on your grades, we zero in on the courses that you've chosen to take. In the absence of standardized testing, a lot of us are paying much more attention to things like, if you're looking at going to an engineering school, if you want to go to MIT, if you are looking at a college university that offers a STEM discipline and you're interested in science and technology and engineering, that college university, you can safely assume now, is going to pay much more close attention to your math preparation and your science preparation. And if you want to major in engineering in college, it's really going to be expected now that you've nailed chemistry, physics, and biology, that you not only have hit pre-calculus in your senior year, that you're actually in calculus in your senior year, so that you're ready to walk onto that college university campus and hit the ground running with a level of math preparation and science preparation. If you're looking at college universities that are more globally oriented, if you're looking at those highly selective college universities where a lot of students choose to go abroad, where they enroll a large percentage of international students, they're going to be looking at your transcript gauging whether or not you have a level of cultural competence in that transcript. So I know one of the big things that we used to focus on at NYU is whether or not students bailed on foreign language during their senior year, or if they really had full 4 years of foreign language over the course of their entire high school experience. Because to us, if you dropped your foreign language in your senior year, it was sort of a red flag that you weren't really all that interested in the world beyond one's own. And we really wanted to attract students that had kind of a cosmopolitan view of the world. So we were, I would say, largely more attracted to students that cruise through foreign language all the way through graduation. But know that, regardless of the selectivity or the level of selectivity at college universities, they're going to start evaluating your candidacy and probably place the heaviest amount of emphasis on your academic record in 9th, 10th, 11th, and all the way through 12th grade and graduation. I would say, probably the hardest part of my job, or probably the thing that I don't miss the most about being a dean of admissions, is being the person that is responsible for revoking offers of admission. And that's what deans and directors of admission do every summer for students who actually make it through the admission process, but then drop the ball the second half of their senior year. And every year, deans and directors of admission have to curtail and curb those offers of admission for students that drop the ball in senior year. So know that college universities are going to be evaluating you academically all the way through graduation and all the way through the time that you graduate from your individual high school. What else could I share with you? At the highly selective level, those universities that are kind of places that'll have those single digit admit rates, and those admit rates, then they're in that really highly selective range. I would say what you can safely assume is that what you do outside the classroom is going to be evaluated and weighted relatively heavily. College universities that are super selective are likely going to zero in on what you've done outside the classroom, and really looking to measure the impact that you've had outside the classroom. So, I was that kind of kid who, when I was in high school, I just wanted my picture in the yearbook for everything. I joined, dozens of different clubs and organizations. And I don't know that I would actually argue that I had much impact in anything. But, if you're looking to go to a place like Stanford, or a place like Columbia, or a place like NYU or BU, those college universities are really going to kind of zero in on the commitment, the loyalty, the real impact that you've had outside the classroom. So you need to safely assume that that's going to be a big part of the process. Your writing ability is going to need to be at a really, really strong level. And while I would say most students, especially from places like Unionville, students tend to kind of nail the essay and nail the personal statement. But I don't care where you go to high school. I don't care if you're at Unionville or if you're at a really underperforming public high school. Where students inevitably drop the ball when they're looking at highly selective college universities is that they don't realize that highly selective college universities will typically ask you to do supplementary writing above and beyond that personal statement that you can start working on as early as your junior year in high school. So at NYU, we used to ask every single student, why did they choose to apply to NYU? And it wielded much more influence in the admission process than students would think. And we would almost kind of run those essays through an unofficial test. We would read those essays to one another, these why NYU essays. And if we could read that essay, and instead of the 3 letters NYU in that essay, we would read the essay and we would just say the word Columbia where it says NYU, or say the word Fordham or the Juilliard School. And if the essay made sense and it didn't speak to NYU, it really wasn't a really powerful why NYU essay. And I would say at every really, really super selective college university that I've represented before, those supplemental essays and those short answer essays, even though we give students a really small amount of real estate in the application, and they believe that it's not all that important, it is probably more important than you would imagine.
And Sean, that's great feedback, and I'm very excited to say, Sean, we actually, one of our future webinars is we have actually one of the topics is the components of writing the college essay and supplemental essays. So that's fantastic. I'm very happy you brought that up. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Though these short answer essays and these kind of supplemental writing that you'll be asked to do for college universities cannot be done in the last 15 days after you've applied to one of these institutions and you've been rejected or deferred, and you have 15 days before the deadline for the other college universities that you might become interested in. What else could I share with you? I guess letters of recommendation are sort of kind of roaring back with a frenzy in the absence of standardized testing or required standardized testing. College universities, like Jeremy mentioned, are really looking at the other components of your application and leaning on the other components of the application a little bit more heavily. And I'm noticing that college universities are using letters of recommendation, not just for admission, but if you're applying to a place like Temple, we're looking at letters of recommendation for our honors program. We're looking at possibly letters of recommendation for other areas that we might be evaluating you for, things like merit scholarships and stuff like that. What else?
Sean, on that note, we actually had a question come into the, I don't mean to interrupt, but we had a question come in just on that topic. So I wanted to touch on that. We had a question coming in. Does the letter of recommendations, it have to be from the junior year? Could it be from their students' 10th grade year? Like, what does that look like to you, as an admissions person? What holds weight? I've had in the past parents and students ask a ton of questions about, I know the core classes, the English, the math, the science, the history. I know some schools specify that they want those. However, my son or daughter is just extremely talented in art or just really, really loves the graphic communications class, the morning TV show class, and they put so much time into that, and that teacher could really speak to that. What does that look like? So if you could touch on that a little bit, Sean, I appreciate that.
I mean, first and foremost, you have to know exactly where you're applying to get really accurate advice about where these letters of recommendation should come from, because some universities, especially the super selective ones, and especially the ones that offer STEM and engineering programs, will give you firm direction. Like applying to the Fu Foundation School of Engineering and Applied Science at Columbia, they're going to want one of those letters of recommendation to come from one of your math faculty members or perhaps one of your science faculty members. So some things are going to be non-negotiable. You just need to follow the directions about what kind of letters they want. I've never really cared whether or not a letter of recommendation has come from someone that taught you first year, second year, third year, or fourth year in high school. I don't really care. If you feel like that faculty member can speak to your academic ability, knock yourself out. What I don't necessarily want is I don't want necessarily letters of recommendation from alumni. I don't want letters of recommendation from a board of trustees. I don't want letters of recommendation from kings, from queens, from senators, congresspeople, from Hollywood celebrities. Those are not the letters of recommendation that we want. We want the letters of recommendation to come from people like you, your counselors, who can help illuminate a little bit more about your high school, your context. So when I was at Columbia, my responsibility was to read all the applications from the greater Philadelphia area. So I relied really heavily on the counselor letter of recommendation to learn more about Unionville, to learn more about the high schools that I was ultimately responsible for, and advocating on the behalf of the students that would apply to Columbia from the greater Philadelphia area. So that's one area of a letter of recommendation. And I would say you can safely assume that college universities really most want to hear from your faculty members. And I would lean, maybe with some exceptions, I would lean toward those core academic subjects. So math, science, foreign language, social studies, English, and the humanities. Those are the areas where I'd probably lean toward. But honestly, and this is going to sound really trite and really kind of obnoxious, but the best way to get a really strong letter of recommendation is just to be a nice person. People think that the best letters of recommendation that we get are from the students that are the smartest, the students that are the best writers, the students that have the highest GPA. And that's not necessarily the case. Like, the kids that get the best letters of recommendation are the kids that are just nice human beings and good citizens. And those students who know the first name of the janitors and the custodians and the people that serve their food and check their IDs and actually ask how their day is doing. Those are the kids that get the really nice letters of recommendation, because if you've been a schmuck for the last 4 years, it's really hard to write you a nice letter of recommendation, even if you're going to be the valedictorian of your graduating class.
Sure. Sean, so I have another, if we kind of take a step back here, if you don't mind, Sean, it's very valuable having you with your experience at different universities. If you can kind of cover for our families out here, I know a lot of times in these webinars, we kind of get caught up on some of the very, very specific details. if you don't mind covering for me just the basics of the application deadlines, like what's the difference between rolling admissions to early action, to early decision to regular decision. And then if you don't mind, Sean, at the end, when it coming from a highly selective, discussing a highly selected school, a lot of our families have a lot of questions about early decision in particular and early decision too, what that looks like and kind of your experience behind that. So if you can cover them all and then really touch on the early decision and early decision too for our families here, that'd be extremely helpful.
Sure. And it's maddening. And can you imagine not being from the United States and trying to have to figure out this language that we have? I mean, our international students who need to kind of navigate the language that we use just to describe deadlines in college admissions is maddening. But, I think the easiest way to kind of wrap your head around it is that most college universities in America will give you the opportunity to submit your application early and get an early read on your application. So that's probably the kind of big picture. And, quite honestly, if I was going through this process again, and I was scrolling back to my own high school experience, I probably would be applying to at least some college universities earlier in my senior year rather than later.
Yes.
So most college universities in America will have a regular decision deadline, which typically is either January 1st or February 1st, or maybe even March 1st.
Yep.
A lot of public universities have what's called rolling admission, where you submit your application and then admission decisions are made on a rolling basis. But even those universities tend to have kind of a final deadline later in the winter season. But you're likely going to find that most college universities that probably kids at Unionville are most interested in do have some type of early round. Now, early action are those programs where you can apply early and there's no binding commitment. You get an early read on your application and you have all the way until May 1 to make your decision, to compare your financial aid offers. But then, most of the Ivies and a lot of the super selective college universities have something that's called early decision, where you commit to that, you apply to that university by November 1st or November 15th. And then they give you not only a read on your application, but they give you an early decision. Mm-hmm. And that decision is expected to be binding in the sense that if the university admits you and they give you a financial aid offer that enables you to attend, then you're really expected to give them a quick decision back. Yep. So at NYU, and I don't know what the timeline is now, but we had 2 rounds of early decision where you'd apply by November 1. Yep. We would notify all the students by December 15th and then simulcast both their admission and their financial aid award at the same time. And within 15 to 30 days, we wanted a decision. So you had your admission offer, you had your admission decision, you had your financial aid decision. You need to kind of like make a decision really, really quickly. And the expectation was that you would come unless you couldn't afford to come. And then we would have a second round of early decision where you could apply by February 1st or I think it was February 1st, and we'd provide students with a decision it was January 1st for early decision 2. And then we would notify those students sometime in mid to early February, and the process was very similar. I do think that you can safely assume that college universities that have early rounds of admission, whether they're early action, early decision, or some have what's called restrictive early action admission, which is kind of a hybrid between the two. I don't want to speak for every college university in America, but I think you can safely assume that most college universities in America that have an early round of admission will have a higher admit rate for the students that apply early versus the students who apply regular or rolling admission. Mm-hmm. I know students immediately hear that and they think it's automatically going to be easier to gain admission if I apply early decision or early action. And that's not necessarily the case. You might statistically increase your chances, but typically if a college university has an early round of admission, it doesn't necessarily mean that the academic credentials of the students who are applying early versus the students who are applying regular or rolling are going to be weaker than the students that apply during that later round of admission. So it's not necessarily easier to gain admission during an earlier round of admission, but you likely would increase your chances if you apply earlier.
Thank you. Yeah, Sean, that's great. We actually just answered one of the questions that just came into the chat with that. I appreciate that. So, Sean, we have another great question here, and you mentioned some of the world languages earlier, and kind of how you saw that in the application process. I get this here and there, Sean, so I'd love to hear your opinion. I know it might not be very black and white for each college and university, but just your experiences. Sure. A student comes in, mechanical engineering major, they love the math, they love the science, and they would love to double up in math or science their senior year. And in order to do that, they're going to have to make some sacrifices. And one of them may be not taking that fourth year of a world language. What does that look like as far as your what you've seen?
Totally
in the
fine.
application process? Okay.
Totally fine. I mean, if you're somebody that is really looking at a STEM discipline, science, technology, engineering, math, if you're really focused in that particular area, and you want to double up on calculus and physics or statistics and environmental science your senior year, and you do want to bail on that foreign language, then that's fine. But if you are looking at the social sciences, or if you are looking at the humanities,
sure,
keep going with foreign language all the way through senior year.
Okay, good. So we get another question that came in about the application process, and it kind of a little bit specific, but it kind of talks to, you know, the emphasis on extracurricular activities and what the thought process is in that. And I know that could look a little different from school to school also, but you know, how much would you say the extracurriculars how much weight do you put on that? What does that look like? You know, what's your perspective on it? If you don't mind, you know, sharing about that.
I mean, at the highly selective level, it's a significant part of the process. I mean, it's so hard to kind of quantify this, but so maybe I'll try to give you like an analogy or some examples. But you know, when I was at Stanford, I would have students all the time that, I mean, you know, everybody knows about Stanford, but I think one of the things that people gravitate to Stanford for is, you know, they want to be at a place that has a really strong athletic program. And Stanford tends to attract really sporty kids and kids that really have an interest in athletics. And so, you know, I remember this student coming up to me at a college fair once and said, you know, I want to come to Stanford, and I'm like the best golf player that we have at my high school. And like, I think I could really play for Stanford. I'm great. And I'm thinking, I just gave a golf cart tour to Michelle Wee a couple of weeks ago. Like, I mean, babe, you're great, but I mean, at the super highly selective level, you do have to be prepared that you're going to be competing in an applicant pool, even on the extracurricular front, with people that are nationally and internationally recognized in what they're doing outside the classroom. So, you know, you might be distinguished extracurricularly within your high school community, but you are going to be competing on a national and international scale.
Yeah, and Sean, on that point too, we had a great question coming from a parent in our community. You know, do you as admissions officers, do you take in consideration that depend upon the community, depend upon the parts of the country you live in, COVID is a major factor for what's open and available for students to be able to be involved in extracurriculars, even volunteering? I mean, how much do you take that into account, and just what's your perspective on that?
Absolutely. I mean, the kind of regional expertise that I think college universities have is pretty powerful. I mean, I most of the places, and I don't want to again speak for every college university, but most of the college universities in America that you'll likely be looking at will have at least one person on that admissions committee who really understands your context and who really understands your region. So, you know, even though I was the dean of admissions at NYU, my kind of side job was to be the person that was responsible for doing the first read of all the students that would apply to NYU from Iran, Israel, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Alabama, and Mississippi. So it was my job on the admissions committee to educate everybody about world affairs from Alabama, Mississippi to Yemen. And I was the person that was really expected to illuminate and explain what life was like in that part of those parts of the world. And so I do think that the college university admission officers, for the most part, you can at least safely assume that someone will have your back on the admissions committee and will really be able to help everybody else understand. And, you know, I think Jeremy kind of started his talk by talking about, you know, the pandemic really was the great equalizer. So, you know, worldwide, this is something that has impacted everyone, but still we do understand that the pandemic has influenced what you've been able to do outside the classroom.
Sure, that's great. Thank you, Sean. So, Sean, I have just one more question here, and then I'll ask if Jeremy's able to pop back in here in a minute or two. And then, like I said, I'll open up things to both of you to talk a little bit about what it looks like to visit a college and making the most of your college visit. But, Sean, last question for you, and this is a little bit early for this question, considering we have a lot of families that might be students in 10th grade, 11th grade, but they're going to eventually potentially face this, especially if they're applying to highly selective universities and colleges. can you talk a little bit about mid-year grades? What's the importance behind them? What does that look like if schools are looking for students to submit them? And is there anything that students can do? It's kind of, I guess, a twofold question here, Sean. Sorry to pile it on you, but twofold question. Is there anything students can do if they're deferred, or what would your recommendations be from that standpoint? As a students in their senior year, or even halfway through their senior year with the mid-year grades and getting deferred, and any possibility. So I appreciate that. And then Jeremy, I'll kind of open things up to both of you about the college visits here in a minute. So thank you both.
Mid-year grades, super important. Like senior year can sometimes be the most influential year of your entire college search process. I mean, I would say ninth grade is probably the least important year. I think most of us are willing to give students a pass, even at the highly selective level, for students that have had a rocky start to their high school experience.
Yep.
So even for students that have had really a modest performance in ninth grade, I think you can turn on the power and really be competitive for a wide variety of colleges and universities later. I don't know about too many college universities that are all that forgiving for weaker grades during your senior year. So senior grades, super important. So you really need to kind of keep heavy on the gas all the way through graduation.
Okay.
And the second part of your question was about
yeah, that was the mid-year grades. And then the next part of the question was about students. And again, we're talking about a very small percentage of students, but if you're deferred or even waitlist, anything along those lines, what can this, I have students come in, as counselors, we have students come in all the time and say, what else can I do? What else would you recommend? And I know some schools are very specific about, listen, this is the only thing you can do, or, they'll check their website, but what recommendations could you possibly make?
There ain't much. You can go home and do your calculus homework. You can get good grades. So keep your grades up. Like you definitely, if you've been deferred or you're been offered a space on the wait list, your grades are definitely going to be important, and your grades can definitely help you gain a space. That's first and foremost what I would advise. Some college universities will give you the opportunity to actually complete a form that really allows you to demonstrate your interest. At the very least, I certainly would communicate with that college university a little bit later after you've received that news to affirm your interest, and that definitely should come, like Jeremy mentioned, from the student and not the parent. A parent telling me that their son or daughter is still interested isn't really compelling. But I would say probably more than anything, y'all need to like pick up the pieces and rally around the other college universities that you may be interested in. I mean, I get really worried about students that get fixated on that place that deferred them to the regular decision round or put them on the wait list. It's not a red flag, but it's a pink flag that things might not go in your favor, and you really need to rally. I mean, I applied early decision when I was a high school student. I applied to Syracuse University. I desperately wanted to go to Syracuse more than life itself. And I did what Jeremy would probably throttle me for. Not only did I get the window decal for my family's car, I put the window decal on the card before I even got my admission decision, because I was 100% committed going to Syracuse, and I was flat out rejected early decision. So I didn't even get deferred over the regular decision round or waitlisted. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I had to pick up the pieces really quickly and apply to other college universities and get excited about college universities. So get excited about other places really quickly.
Yeah, great point. Hey, Sean and Jeremy, just awesome job here tonight, both of you. I know we have a little bit left here, but this is, I mean, we keep seeing messages come in, and just our community is very appreciative of what both of you are bringing to the table tonight. I really appreciate it. So if you don't mind, both of you, we'll switch gears here a little bit. I wanted to talk a little bit about, we mentioned the making the most of your college visit. So I know, Sean, you sounds like you've been on some smaller campuses. Jeremy, obviously at Penn State, and spending some a little bit of time at some of the branch campuses over there. I guess, Jeremy, if you don't mind, I'll kind of kick things over to you first, and then Sean, just kind of what you see, for anything that Jeremy may have left out, being that he between the branch campus and the large Penn State campus. If there's anything you can offer up to our families about making the most of our college visit, because I have to be honest, I will say this, and I'm very impressed with our community in that they take advantage of trying to get their feet on the campuses if available. I know COVID's put a little bit of damper on that. I'll let both of you speak to that, but they do. They're more than willing. They take full advantage of our spring break, which is a nice time for our families, because they're actually we're off, during spring break, and a lot of the campuses are in full session. So, Jeremy, if you don't mind, I don't want to steal anybody's thunder here. If you don't mind taking over, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, those are great points, and I will say when it comes to being positive, about what your college search is going to look like, this is one of the blessings that class of 2023 has that the prior two classes really didn't have. That first cohort, that class of 20, they might not have ever really had their feet on some college campuses, especially of the schools that maybe they were admitted to. So they almost had to make a blind decision with what the campus was like and how the vibe on campus. And certainly the class of 21 was in that particular predicament as well. But where you're differed is that a lot of these campuses have opened up, and we've gotten a lot better at mitigating groups and how we run tours and the times that we offer tours and what do we require of families to get to us. Like if there's a vaccinate proof of vaccination, we're requiring like getting that all knocked out earlier. And so there's much more of an opportunity for the class of 23 to have a quote unquote traditional looking tour opportunity in front of them than the prior two classes. So that's something you should be happy about. I'd say a couple of things that I really recommend. One is logistical, and the other is in terms of being able to actually remember your visit. But from a logistical standpoint, our tours are not as large as they were, because we try to, at Penn State, we're used to having 50 people on a tour, the kids walking backwards, showing everything around, to mitigate the spread of the virus, and especially Omicron in its very contagious state. Those tour groups are a lot smaller in size. So everybody and their grandmother is going to be trying to schedule those tours, right, during that spring break. You might have to get creative and try to go at a different time. Yeah. Right. Because our tours fill up quicker than they ever did before. And our university is used to that happening. Like Penn State, once our calendar opens up, you can't play around. And that was in prior years, but now even more so. It's like, whoa, you really have to be on it with trying to schedule a tour, especially at our larger campuses. And all 20 of our campuses are offering tours, and so that's something that you can do. And I recommend, because we give you a first choice and a second choice campus, taking a look at non-University Park campuses is a really smart move. I was shocked at what I found when I finally opened myself up to looking at different campuses, and attended a smaller campus for all 4 years because of that, being a graduate myself of the Brandywine campus. So that's one thing I would say from a logistical standpoint. The other big piece of advice that I love talking about the most is you got to take steps to remember your visit, because the first 5 visits you go on, they're all going to stand out. Like when you step foot on Temple's campus and you see those gorgeous apartments that are right off of Broad Street, you're going to say, my word, like sign me up. This is incredible, right? So you're going to get excited about that. And then you'll come to Penn State and you'll see the student hub with the natural light that just cascades through the windows, right? And the students who sit up on this tiered group of stairs and do their studies. Like, you're going to say, that's incredible. And then you're going to go to South Carolina and just be floored by the library. But when it becomes like your 10th, your 15th, your 20th visit, you're going to be like, who had the apartments off the main street? I don't know. What was that, Immaculata? Like, you're not going to remember, right? And so there are 3 things that I recommend students and parents do. Number 1, take notes. Take notes, and students take your own notes and parents take your own notes, because one of the things I found with my family, my recollection of my visit and my father's recollection, those were 2 different things, right? Like, I was just falling in love with so much of the window dressing, and my dad was asking those big questions like we talked about before. And when you have those notes, now you have a comprehensive view of the university, because those small things you should be able to fall in love with as a student, right? But the parents, sometimes it's like, wait a minute, like, I'm not so sure. They didn't really ever talk about a student's ability to find internships in this particular academic college. That kind of scares me a little bit, right? So parents, and students, both take your own notes. I want you to take your own pictures around campus too, because, we talk about the importance of words in those notes. Well, a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? We hear that statement all the time. And those visual cues will bring you back like, oh my gosh, yes, this is where a lot of students hung out, or this is where the advising center is, and all those types of things. And so it helps that visit come back into your mind from a visual standpoint. And then third, I want you to bring a bag with you. Because, Sean will tell you, like, the stuff we mail to you, and some of you are probably starting to get some collegiate mail, and I apologize in advance. for the way it comes in, it's going to be Fast and Furious, but it's very generic, right? It'll tell you a little bit about our school, our principals, what admissions kind of looks like, what majors we have. But what if I'm a student? I want mechanical engineering. We're not going to mail you a brochure about mechanical engineering. We're worried about the state of rainforest as it is with what we're printing. Even more so now, we're trying to minimize that imprint we have globally, right? And we're all going green, and we're very sensitive to these things. And so when you walk on campus, though, and you're doing a visit and a tour of our engineering facilities, guess what you're going to find there? You're going to find a kiosk with all those specific brochures about our academic programs there. You see why I say you need a bag? Because we're never going to mail those to you, so you better grab them while you can get them. It reminds me of when I was a kid and I used to like go into the Philadelphia Auto Show. Right now, you always know you want to be at the Philadelphia Auto Show in like the first 2 days because you still have all the bags, from the car manufacturer. So you're throwing all the brochures in like you were ever going to buy any of those vehicles. But you were so excited because when you went that second week, dude, there's no brochures left. There's no bags. There's no other trinkets. But when you're on these college visits, bring that bag so you can bring the stuff home. And when you're sitting there in decision-making time and deliberation time with where you're going to apply and how this list is turning out, when you have those notes, those pictures, and those brochures in front of you, you think you're going to have an increased chance of making an informed decision? You are. So those are just two of the main areas that, I'd like to give some advice.
That's great. Great. Yeah, Sean, I think I did it to you again here. I don't know how much Jeremy left over for you, but anything you would add, just especially at the different campuses you've been on. I mean, I know you've seen a lot, across the country, it sounds like. Anything else you would add?
Two things. One, skip the residence halls. As much as Jeremy mentioned, I'd love you all to come visit Morgan Hall. It's like a skyscraper on Broad Street. It's a luxury condominium complex. That's probably what I should tell you to come visit. But it's such a colossal waste of time to hyper-focus on visiting the residence halls on a college tour, because the chances of you actually having the bedroom that we're going to show you 2 years or a year from now that you apply to that college university, it's infinitesimal. Like the chances of you having the room that you see, it's just not really. And it always bums me out because I sometimes feel like we're selling timeshare condominiums when students come on to our campus tours, because it's their burning interest. They come onto campus, and if we just showed them the residence hall, I think they'd be happy. But it's not the best use of your time. Whereas I can guarantee that everyone that comes on our campus tour is going to spend a lot of time in Charles Library. I can guarantee you're going to spend a lot of time in the Student Center. I can guarantee you're going to spend time in academic buildings, regardless of your academic major, regardless of what your preference is. So skip the residence halls, or at least postpone visiting the residence halls until after you've been offered admission. Yep. And if you've offered admission, then you can do a deeper dive into where you may choose to live. And then the only other thing that I'd share with you is that one of the luxuries of living in Greater Philadelphia, which is like nearly the Athens of America, is that we've got 50 colleges in 50 square miles. So if you're on the younger end of the spectrum listening tonight, just get out there and visit the endless number of college universities in Greater Philadelphia so that you understand what you do and you don't want out of your own college experience. So, visit a small Catholic college, visit a large public research university, visit a small private liberal arts college, visit a major research university that has a branch campus. You have endless options to visit college university campuses, and I think we underestimate just what a luxury we have right in our backyard to just at least start exploring, so that when you do narrow down your list of places that you'll apply to, you understand what you do and you don't want out of your own college experience.
That's great, Sean. I really appreciate that. Yeah, we actually had a question come in earlier in the chat about just kind of getting an understanding of the culture and what that looks like at campuses. And that's a great description both of you were able to provide. I really, really appreciate that. Hey, listen, if both of you don't mind, we just have a couple random questions that kind of came in throughout when both of you were discussing. I didn't want to interrupt. If I could fire a couple of Matt, there's really good questions and really, really surrounded by the application process in itself. So feel free, either of you, to chime in here because we have some pretty good ones in here. First and foremost, we're seeing more and more of this as counselors at the high school level, and I'm sure both of you may be seeing this now that we're a little bit distance from when the pandemic first started. what are your opinions on a gap year? And what does that look like in the admissions process? If either of you can kind of chime in here, if you don't mind.
That's a really good question. Man, it really depends on the student, because I will tell you, I remember my senior year of high school, an upperclassman friend of mine came back for homecoming. And, I was asking him, how's everything going, man? It's good to see you. And the first thing he said to me is, are you going to college? I said, yeah, that's my plan. I'm applying. He said, don't stop. And I was like, this is before gap years were popular. I'm a little older than I used to be. And I was like, what are you talking about? Because that was kind of what he did. And now that I'm in the world of education, I get what he's talking about. What he was alluding to, without having the vocabulary for it, was when you get out of the process of education, when you get out of that habit,
yep,
it's so hard, that routine. It is so hard to reinstitute yourself in it when you haven't read to the level that you've been reading before, when you haven't, written papers, all of those types of things. To assimilate back into that can be very, very difficult. And so gap year, I think, means different things to different people. If your gap year is you sitting on your parents' couch, playing the latest Call of Duty or NBA 2K, let me tell you, that's going to be a big mistake. If if your gap year is something that's still going to have you learning, taking in valuable experiences, working, that's incredible. Like I actually just went out to Sedona, Arizona for the first time in my life, and I'm now moving there, by the way. But anyway, I fell so in love with it. But on one of the restaurants we went to, there was a young man, and we just got to talk, and he was from New York City, and he was out in Sedona doing his gap year. So he was working, and I was like, oh, really? Like, what made you do this? And he said, well, I wanted to see a place that was pretty significantly different from where I was from. But I also thought maybe it was important for me to see what it's like to live without an education. Right. And so I said, well, what's your plan? He said, I'm applying to college. I'm applying to colleges now. Right. Like, so what he had seen, and a valuable lesson he had learned, is like, I might not want to be out in the world without that. And that was a lesson that he needed to learn. And it was interesting. So his gap year was intentional. There was purpose behind it. But, my question to you is, what plan do you have? And also, like, what universities are you interested in attending? Because I will tell you, if you were like, some schools operate in different ways. Like, if you're like, okay, I'm going to do a gap year, but I'm going to take a few classes at this place. Well, some schools will say, well, that voided your offer of admission. Now, because you've taken courses at another university, that
Sure.
wasn't part of the deal, right? And while other universities will be like, oh, that's okay, as long as you attempted under 18 credits, your offer still applies. So, like, really, you still, if you're thinking about doing a gap year, still need to have a conversation with the universities that you're intending to apply to later, because they may need a little proof that you didn't enroll other places, or they may want to know what you did with that time.
No, that's great feedback. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Sean, I actually have, I'll kind of gear this one towards you if you don't mind. I appreciate that, Jeremy. Sean, we're seeing more and more of this. We get tons of emails as counselors and literature that's coming in from all over the place, mail. Talk a little bit about the summer pre-college programs, right? I mean, I know different universities have them. Students are jumping all over them. I mean, we're doing recommendations now for, I feel like, sixth graders at this point. What is that? What's your opinions on that? What does that look like? Does that change anything in the admissions process of a student showing that interest or a part of some program for the summer prior to their application? I mean, anything you can offer on that?
I have to say this delicately, because we all have these summer programs and we all love our own summer programs, but I don't think families really understand that, and they wouldn't understand that a good number of these programs exist to generate revenue for our college university campuses when we're not largely residential for the summer. And that's why partly the COVID pandemic hit college universities so hard. These auxiliary enterprises that we run during the summer were really hit hard, because while we could stage them virtually, we didn't have the opportunity to have students living in our residence halls and generating revenue. So, I mean, that's probably overstating what these programs are like, but the idea that you're going to be able to go to the Brown summer program and get a leg up on the admission process at Brown, or you're going to be able to go to Harvard for the summer and you're going to get an advantage in the admission process at Harvard, is just one of the probably biggest misconceptions of college admissions there is out there. I mean, there are some great programs that you can do. And if you have a burning interest in architecture and you want to spend the summer at Barnard studying architecture, and then you ultimately apply to Barnard, that's, that could possibly work to your advantage. But just attending one of these sexy summer programs is not going to give you an advantage in the admission process. And quite honestly, just getting a job at the Jersey Shore for the summer probably would have possibly even more impact, because you might have more of an interesting experience and more to write about your college essay than one of these summer programs, which are.
No, great, Sean. I appreciate that. Hey, Jeremy, I had one come in here. One of our questions come in, and we do get this a lot. So, and in particular, we get this from students that are applying particularly to Penn State in their nursing program, as an example. So Jeremy, the question is, we have our vocational high school at TCHS in Chester County, and we have a program, allied health for seniors. I'll use nursing as an example. It's a great program. They do a wonderful job. It's becoming more and more selective each year, it feels like, for students to get in, but it allows that hands-on experience for students at the TCHS, their senior year, to get a little bit more of a hands-on experience. Does that sway anything from a mission standpoint, as far as the student that's just going to not be a part of the TCHS process, but doing really well in their science, do really well in their math, and just a strong student, they're going to apply to nursing at Penn State? Or how does that look if the student actually is a part of that TCHS allied health program? Jeremy, when you see some of these applications come in?
That's a great question. And, using the College of Nursing at Penn State as an example is awesome, because that is a way more holistic review than pretty much everything else we do outside of our accelerated pre-med programs in the performance arts majors. Like they will look at everything, and will that jettison you above the rest of the applicant pool? Not necessarily, but every college and university, they like to see correlation, right? Like between what you're saying you're interested in studying and what you do well in, or seem to have aptitude in, right? And I'm sure Sean has seen this, especially throughout his career. Like, you'll meet these kids at college fairs, these students, and they're like, hey man, I want to come to Penn State or Stanford for this program or that program, and using nursing as an example to say, hey, I want to come for nursing. And you say, oh, okay, well, what are your favorite courses? English. And you're like, okay, well then we might have a really well-rounded student here. And then you say, well, what courses do you not enjoy? Well, it's got to be math or science. Well, you're going to kill every patient you treat, right? If we somehow let you through these doors with no math or science skills, it's going to be a disaster, right? And so when you show me, hey, I've been at TCHS, which I love, by the way, it's another place I haven't been in a while and I miss it, and you've taken these relevant courses, it is something that will shine. It looks good, but also, and this goes in line with what we just talked about with these summer programs. We focus so much on how is so-and-so going to view this. You can't ignore the benefit to yourself personally. Stop thinking and making all your decisions about how is this university going to look at this.
Yep.
If you do a summer program in engineering, it deepens your love for the field. That was the benefit. Forget whether or not that college uses that in their evaluation. The fact that you've now confirmed that this is exactly what you want to do, that's a blessing. That's incredible. And it's the same thing with TCHS and the allied health. If you leave that allied health program and you're saying, you know what, this is really my major, this is what I want to do, that's incredible, because now you're not doing what people like me were doing, where you're just selecting majors out of thin air and then shocked in 2 days when you hate it, right? Like, so you're now increasing the likelihood that you found the right path tremendously. I think that is the benefit, and it's just like those other students who do cosmetology, at TCHS. If they do that program, they leave certified and they like it. That was the whole purpose of it. So, don't discount that personal fulfillment part of it.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you. Yeah. Well, hey, listen, to both of you. I know we took up a lot of your time here. I'm going to start to pitch kind of what's coming up, in the near future for some of our webinars. Just, not to put you on the spot or anything. We covered a lot here, and we had some very specific topics we were trying to cover. I'll bring up, I know we had a question coming in here, in particular about SAT and ACTs and test optional. That in our chat, that's actually exactly one of the topics we're going to cover in our next webinar. So, just sticking to what we kind of talked about tonight here and some of our topics for tonight. Before I start to wrap things up, is there anything either of you that I didn't give you a chance to discuss or open up about? I know we talked about a lot, or anything else before I start closing things out here that you'd like to share with the community?
Yeah, I would just say keep your mind open. It's so funny how many people I talk to, adults and folks who work in the field that Sean and I work in, who wound up at the places that they least likely thought they would wind up, but now they say, hey, I do it 100 out of 100 more times. I know, Sean talked about that with Syracuse, right? And how, normally that a student thinks, well, that's my nightmare, that I don't wind up at this place I dreamed about.
Yeah.
But there are so many choices out there, and being a graduate of a smaller Penn State campus myself, and just the tutelage I received, the mentorship I received, still being a part of that Penn State community and alumni network, and leaving with only $12,000 in student loans when many of my friends were towards six figures in student loans. I mean, what a fortunate situation I found myself in, and it was one I finally got out of my own way.
Yeah.
And stop saying, well, this is what I want and that's what I need. And I took a step back and said, okay, 18 and 22 that's not the highlight of my life. If you make the right college decision, the years after your college experience will be the ones that you call back on. Whenever a person's like, college was the best years of my life, always say it under my breath, then your school failed you. It failed you. If 18 and 22 is the best time in your life, outside of just being able to get up without your knees aching, like that is not a good thing. It's not. And so, keep your mind open. And the other thing I would say is, right now I'm having so many conversations with students who are so focused on where they didn't get in.
Yeah. Yep.
Focus more on who says yes, please. When you get those offers of admission, they are not something to be taken lightly. That admissions committee or that admissions counselor did not feel bad for you and said, well, let me throw them an offer, or did eeny, meeny, miny, mo. They deliberated over this. They thought about you. They looked at the positive traits and qualities that you had. And they said, you know what? This is a young man or young woman I want on my campus. I can see them here. Do not take that lightly. Stop focusing so much time and energy on who said no and realize who said yes, because those places really do want you as a part of their community.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate that. Yeah, and you're right. That's a lot of what we discuss over at Unionville with our parents and our students too. So I appreciate you echoing that. That's great. Sean, anything else to add before I start kind of wrapping things up here?
I just say, and it's similar to some of the advice that Jeremy just gave. Don't fear rejection in this process. I mean, one of the things that I always share with students and families is that if you aren't rejected or denied by at least one college university in your senior year, then you haven't really done a thoughtful college search, and you really could have maybe aimed a little higher, and you could have thrown your hat in the ring for a place that was even more selective than you gave yourself credit for. So don't fear rejection. I mean, you don't want to be rejected by every place that you apply to college and university. So you need to create a balanced list of places that are likely to admit you and realistic to admit you and unlikely to admit you, but don't fear rejection. I mean, if you move through this process, and let's just say you are admitted to the college university of your dream early decision, know that rejection is going to come and find you sooner or later. Like, you're ultimately going to be rejected at something in your life. So if it happens to you the first semester of your senior year, it's not the worst thing in the world. You'll pick up the pieces really quickly and you'll be just fine. And similar to what Jeremy mentioned, I ended up at my third choice, and it was a wonderful, blissful, magical college experience.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Sean. Hey, listen, everyone. Again, Sean, Jeremy, I'm just, as always, just extremely impressed. I can't begin to tell you how helpful this has been. Our community truly does appreciate this. I can't begin to tell you. usually after we do one of these webinars, I'm tempted to start flooding your mailboxes with the amount of feedback we get about how well these things go, and it's really due in part to all the knowledge that you bring to the table, and really the honesty that both of you provide to our community. So I truly appreciate the both of you, Jeremy and Sean, just such a big help. I'd like to thank all of our community here tonight to join us. I think we had upwards over 100 people join, which is incredible. So I really appreciate everyone in the community coming out. I appreciate those asking questions. This is recorded, so just in case you missed a part of it or you missed some of this, we'll be able to have it posted within the next week up on our counseling center website, our UHS counseling center website. I'd like to thank our counselors behind the scenes. Mrs. Miller has been kind of controlling some of the Q&A, so you might have seen her name pop up here. We had other counselors throughout the night working to help out with things. And I'd also like to thank Justin Webb. He's our tech guru and kind of controls and sets this all up and makes sure everything runs smoothly for the night. So that was a big help. I do want to plug this for our next one. Okay. February 23rd, to everybody in the community, February 23rd, we'll be back at this again, 6:30, February 23rd, very similar setup. And again, I had to stop myself here tonight because I was tempted. Sean and Jeremy brought up a number of our topics. We're going to be discussing financial aid on February 23rd. We're going to be discussing SAT, ACT, and test optional, and how to weigh that decision and what that looks like for different schools. And we're also going to be discussing, as Sean talked at length about, we're going to be discussing the components of the college essay and what that looks like. And we'll have some college admission reps on to discuss some of those topics. So we're really looking forward to the next college webinar on February 23rd at 6:30. Again, I'll be sending out emails to the community the same way I did to hold this. And we'll also have the Zoom link up when it gets closer to February 23rd for the next session. So again, thank you, everybody. I can't begin to tell you how much we appreciate this. Sean and Jeremy, I'll be in touch, okay? And I really appreciate you helping us out here. We do appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.